Picture this, 200 wedding guests in their finest clothes, standing in a beautiful open field, completely unaware that field had just been fertilized with 2,000 gallons of liquid manure. This is the story of how one homeowner's patience ran out and how a homeowners association learned a very expensive lesson about property lines. Let's rewind to where it all started. In a quiet residential community, bordered by a small working farm, lived a homeowner we'll call Dana. Dana kept a handful of goats, a vegetable garden, and a wide back pasture, all legally zoned for agricultural use, grandfathered in long before the HOA existed. Dana mostly kept to herself, paid dues on time, and never caused trouble. The HOA was run by a board president we'll call Vivian, the kind of person who treated every rule in the community handbook as sacred scripture, and every gap in it as an opportunity. Neighbors joked that Vivian had opinions about everyone's mailbox color. Dana's farm, sitting just outside the HOA's official boundary, had always been a minor irritation to her. Everything changed when Vivian's daughter got engaged. Suddenly, Vivian needed a picture-perfect venue, rustic, spacious, and free. She'd seen Dana's open pasture from the community clubhouse 100 times. Now she saw dollar signs she wouldn't have to spend. That field would be perfect. Rolling grass, a little rustic charm. It practically screams wedding photos. Vivian didn't ask her daughter what she wanted. She decided what she wanted, and what she wanted was Dana's pasture. Vivian showed up at Dana's gate with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dana, I was hoping we could talk about borrowing your back field for my daughter's wedding. It would mean so much to the community." "I appreciate you asking, but that field has livestock rotating through it, and honestly, my insurance doesn't cover public gatherings out there. I just can't risk it." It was a reasonable answer. Vivian did not take it well. A week later, an official-looking letter arrived, a community beautification initiative request, asking Dana to consider hosting approved community events on her land, citing vague language about shared neighborhood aesthetics. Dana filed it away and moved on with her week. Days later, a very different letter showed up, a surprise inspection notice, citing Dana for supposed fence height violations and an unpermitted structure, which turned out to be a decades-old tool shed that had been there since before the HOA existed. Dana noticed the timing wasn't a coincidence. The inspection request had come in less than 48 hours after declining the wedding. It didn't take a detective to see the pattern forming. Without properly notifying Dana, who, as a non-member bordering the HOA, was owed only minimal courtesy notice anyway, the board held an emergency session. Minutes later, a fine notice landed in Dana's mailbox for the shed violation. It was a small fine, technically within the board's rights to issue for properties adjacent to shared access roads. But it was clearly a message, not a genuine code concern. Dana paid it and started keeping records of everything. Then came the letter that changed everything. Vivian announced in writing that the wedding would proceed on the pasture regardless, citing an old, half-forgotten community access easement from decades earlier that she claimed gave the HOA rights to that stretch of land for seasonal gatherings. Dana wasn't a lawyer, so instead of arguing, Dana called a property rights advisor and brought over the deed, the survey, and every letter from the HOA. "This easement language you're describing sounds like it was for utility access, not private events. Let me look at the actual recorded document." A few days later, the advisor confirmed it. The easement was real, but narrowly worded, for utility line maintenance only. It gave the HOA zero legal right to host a private wedding on Dana's land. "You could send a cease and desist right now. You'd win. But there's another option if you want to have some fun with it." Dana smiled for the first time in weeks. As a working farm, that pasture was scheduled for its seasonal fertilizing anyway, a routine agricultural task done every year around this exact time, using a large-capacity manure spreader. Dana simply let the schedule stand. Oblivious, Vivian barreled ahead. String lights went up along the fence line. A rented arch was ordered. Caterers were booked. Vivian posted about the charming countryside wedding to anyone who'd listen, never once asking who actually owned the ground her daughter would be standing on. Dana did the responsible thing and sent a certified letter to the HOA board, clearly stating that scheduled agricultural maintenance, fertilizing, would take place on the pasture on the exact date of the planned event, weather permitting, as it did every year. The board's secretary read the notice aloud at a meeting. Vivian waved it off. She's bluffing. Nobody spreads manure right before a wedding. Continue with setup. The notice went into a drawer, unanswered. The big day arrived. Guests in pastel dresses and pressed suits picked their way across the gravel lot toward the pasture. String lights glittered. A quartet tuned their instruments near the rented arch. Everything looked picture perfect for about 11 more minutes. Right on schedule, exactly as the letter had promised, a tractor pulling a large manure spreader rolled out from the equipment barn and began its routine pass across the field, spraying a wide, even arc of liquid fertilizer across the pasture, the arch, the aisle runner, and the front 3 rows of white folding chairs. Screams, heels sinking into soaked grass, a flower girl sprinting for the fence line, the quartet abandoning their instruments mid-note. Guests scattered in every direction, phones out, recording every second of it. Vivian stood frozen in the middle of the field, drenched, as her carefully staged countryside wedding turned into the county's next viral video. Once the shock wore off, Vivian marched toward Dana's porch, manure still dripping from her sleeve. "You did this on purpose. I'll sue you for every penny you have." Dana calmly stepped outside holding a folder, the certified mail receipt, the advisor's written easement analysis, and a copy of the farm's fertilizing schedule from every year going back a decade, proving this wasn't sabotage. It was routine, documented, scheduled well before any wedding was ever mentioned. "I told you in writing this would happen. You chose to set up anyway." The story spread through the neighborhood group chat within hours. Some residents laughed. Others quietly admitted they'd been fined for far less than an unpermitted tool shed. Vivian resigned from the board within the month, and the HOA quietly updated its bylaws to require actual legal review before citing easements on non-member property. Dana's goats, for what it's worth, seemed thrilled with the extra fertile grass that spring. The takeaway here isn't really about manure, it's about paperwork. When you own property, farm, home, or anything in between, your deed, your surveys, and your written notices are your best protection. Boards and boundaries can overreach. Documentation is what keeps you standing on solid ground, even when things get messy. Has your HOA ever tried to overstep a property line? Tell your story in the comments below. This story is for illustrative purposes and does not constitute legal advice.